I think when I knew him, he was a little bit difficult about the concept of love. I think he had a hard time with it. I think he really loved Frank. I mean, I don't think there was a question. And it's beyond the sexuality of it. He just loved this man. And I think it might have been his greatest love that he ever had.
Welcome, David Joel and Rainer Gross, to the Pollock Krasner House and Study Center. This summer, we have had the pleasure of hosting the series Stones by Larry Rivers and Frank O'Hara. Both of you gentlemen, in addition to being great artists in your own right, worked as studio assistants for Larry Rivers at different times. Larry Rivers, one of the great and enigmatic and visionary post-war artists in American history. I'll start with you, Rainer. What would you say made Larry Rivers such an important, impactful artist?
To me, he was like the missing link between abstract expressionism and pop. When he did Washington Crossing the Delaware, he brought in American history because he had just read War and Peace, and he thought, if this writer can do something about history, I want to do something about history in a painting. And then I remember Roy Lichtenstein said he was inspired by that approach, so he got into the cartoons and something had to do with America. And Larry got this not from Goetz's painting, he got it from a children's book, those soldiers and all that stuff. And that was the initial, brought American imagery back into art. And a lot of everybody were influenced by that. So he was that initial spark. And, you know, the other guys ran with it, you know.
Yeah, this idea of initial spark, being ahead of the curve, being in some ways a transitional figure between bridging one movement and another, but also being untethered to movement.
Right.
Undoubtedly one of the great American modernists and post-war artists. David, what would you say the legacy of Larry Rivers is?
I think he was spot on. I think, you know, Reiner's spot on. It's, if there's a missing link, it's Larry. And it really, you know, it is almost missing from today's dialogue because, you know, a lot of people like to brush over what went on there. I mean, Washington Crossing Delaware was a very significant moment in American painting. I mean, that painting created quite a stir when it happened, and people don't realize how, you know, what that was like at the time. But it did open the eyes of a lot of
younger artists who were a little younger than Larry.
Absolutely, and so it was very significant. And then, you know, so I mean, that would be probably his most important accomplishment, I'd say, in terms of what he could be recognized for. But it you know, he was doing, again, like I said, he came to the pop iconography also before they really started doing that. So he was quite ahead of his time, you know, for interesting reasons. And I think a lot of that gets lost today, you know, and it's a lot of reasons for that too, you know. But
how you met Larry and how you came to be working in his studio with him. Rainer, can we start with you? When did you first meet Larry?
I met Larry in 1972. I was introduced to Larry by Howard Kanowitz, a painter from out here who was a photorealist painter at the time, and I was a student in Germany. And Howard was spending time in Germany, and he was in Documenta 5, which is an international art show in Kassel. And he was looking for an assistant while he was in Germany, had a studio for 6 months because he wanted to teach in Cologne. That never really happened, so he worked there, and he was represented by several galleries there. Because at that time, photorealism was very much being collected in Germany, especially by the Ludwig Museum and the Ludwig family and other museums. And Howard was en vogue in those days. And I was a student, and he was looking for someone, and our teacher said, this is an American artist, anybody speak any English? I said, yeah, I speak English. So I met Howard and worked with him for a little while in his studio, and I said, well, this is very interesting, I enjoy this. And then subsequently, Howard went back to New York and said, well, why don't you come this summer and help me in the summer in New York? And for a young German kid from art school, this sounded very interesting, and I said, sure, wow, this is great. So I came to New York and in the summer of '72. Then he said, well, while I was in Germany, I loaned my air compressor to Larry Rivers, another painter who wanted to try spray painting with this thing. We drove up to Provincetown, so we stopped at Larry's studio on the way, and that's where I met Larry, and he was a whole different way of working from Howard. Larry was like in and out of a lot of different things. Howard was more disciplined in sort of a stylistic way. And I came in there, and it was in his studio, and it was, to me, a fantastically different experience. And now I met David Maisels, who was just lying on the couch. I think he had just smoked a joint. And he had just done, Give Me Shelter and Running Fence with Christo and all that. So this is interesting, So we sort of chatted, and then I went with Howard to Provincetown and worked with him for a while, and went back to Germany and came back a year later to work with Howard. And Howard was very good friends with Larry. Larry was on 14th Street, Howard was on 2nd Avenue and 8th Street. So I used to hang out in both places, and at night, Larry would say, hey, you got any time after you work for Howard? I got some things. So I started working with Larry, too.
When you first met him on that first trip to the US with Howard, what was your first impression of Larry Rivers?
He was very charismatic, and he had these big wide eyes that were always open. And later I found out he had, he had his bags under his eyes removed, so he couldn't really close his eyes very well. And he was like a chicken, and so you could never avoid him that way. And he was always sort of in your face, asking very direct questions. He was very inquisitive and wanted to know everything. And so I enjoyed him very much at the time. He was a different kind of a person I've never met before.
Was he that curious about you even in that first meeting when you were a young student?
Yeah, he wanted to know what young people were thinking.
Wow.
He was always very open to new things.
That's pretty impressive that an established artist would see this, an art student assisting a friend of his and want to know about the student.
Well, he also wanted to know, he was very interested because I was German.
Ah, okay.
And he wanted to figure out how he was speaking Yiddish too. So he said, I have these words. I mean, it wasn't always in the first meeting, but as we got to know each other, he always wanted to speak Yiddish to me and to see what words I could recognize from the German language. And he always was very interested in history. Yes. So we had some kind of a rapport, and I thought, well, there's a lot to learn from me. I want to absorb all this, whatever I can get out of this,
And so then after, it was during your second visit that you started working?
Yeah, Howard fired me at some point.
Okay.
Because I had taken a side job. Howard was paying me, roughly, it was very cheap. He paid me nothing, roughly, and gave me $50 a week, and I could live in his studio, and I was like, I couldn't quite make it on that. So through Larry, actually, I met a woman. Larry she was Kitty Myers. She was doing the tarot cards. And she was doing some projects with Larry. She was a Wall Street investor. And she had bought some of Larry's work, and then she saw what I was doing for Larry. I said, well, I'm working with El Cap for tax shelter deals. And he said, you know, Roy Lichtenstein needs all these cartoons, but Al Capp was the first one he did all the cartoons, and can you make paintings out of his cartoons? So I said, well, you know, let's talk about it. So I made 50 El Cap paintings that were then shown at with Mario Amaya, and he ran this museum on Columbus Circle, which is now a design museum, the Triangle Building. And El Cap went on all the talk shows and told everybody how much fun he had painting and all that stuff. And then those paintings were bought, donated, and someone would get a big tax write-off. I didn't understand the whole thing. I got a certain amount of money per painting. And that allowed me to rent a loft in the city. And Howard got sort of jealous that I had another job, and he fired me.
And this freed you up to work
freed
more
me
with
up,
Larry.
and the whole thing lasted a year. And then I needed another job. So I went back to Larry. So I kept working with Larry in those days.
And so how long did you work with Larry as a
Till
student?
about 1981. And then the last thing, he would then call me once in a while, oh, can't you come in? I got this, I got that to do. And then just once in a while I would go in and help him. But I said, Larry, look, I got to stop this. I got to do my own stuff. I can't keep doing this. It's not that healthy for me. So we stayed friends until actually, you know, I saw him a couple of days before he died. I mean, you called me, right?
And I think it was either me or John.
Yeah, and he was talking Yiddish on his deathbed, and he was lying there, you know. And we you know, he was always happy to see me. I would visit him once in a while, and he would come to my parties. I had this loft right down, you know, a couple of blocks away on St. Mark Street, and we were in contact, and there was always a lot of stuff going on during the times I worked with him that we can probably go in later.
Okay. And so then, David, what was your first experience meeting Larry Rivers?
Well, I wasn't going to say it, but since Howard was a figure in this, I was going to the School of Visual Arts, and I got a BFA, 4 years fine arts, right? But at one point, it's funny because at one point, and Ronnie, you said something earlier, you knew Larry before. I didn't, but I knew Howard before.
Oh.
And Howard was one of the teachers at the School of Visual Arts, and I hope this is not too scandalous, but I think he might have been attracted to my girlfriend at the time.
Okay.
It's possible, because she was, for some class that she was doing a curating class, and I guess it would have been a big coup if she could get a Larry Rivers painting.
Yeah.
And of course Howard knew Larry and liked her, and so she secured, sorry if that's how it happened. I think that's how I remembered it, as a jealous boyfriend. That she knew Larry, and we all kind of knew, wow, you got a Larry Rivers painting for this thing, so you're going to get an A. You know, you're going to do well. But really, what happened was my fourth year of fine arts. It was like the last day of school, and I had the epiphany that I'd done 4 years of fine arts and was qualified for nothing, and was joking around with my fourth year fine arts teachers. Among them was Jack Youngerman, and actually you mentioned Michael Goldberg. I don't think he was there, but Michael Goldberg was also one of my teachers. I really liked him. He was a good guy. Anyway, I was joking around saying, look, I'm qualified, you know, I can do this, but who's going to pay me to do that? So, you know, no one. And then after my spiel, Jack came over to me and offered me a job. But he said, listen, if you find something else, take it, you know, because I'm away for 2 months and blah, blah, blah. And it was the end of 86. So I came in at a weird time. But anyway, it was the end of 86. And I said, great, I was excited. I had a potential job. I'd call him in 2 months. The same day, someone else, and it was someone else that overheard the conversation and worked at the school, and they handed me a piece of paper and said, Larry Rivers is looking for an assistant. Here's his number, give him a call. Oh, Larry Rivers is looking, okay, here he is again, Larry and the Howard thing. So I called up and just cold called, and I was speaking to his assistant at the time, and I just went over to his, went through the 13th Street entrance. Larry had incredible loft on between 14th and 13th Street on First Avenue. It was like a city block long. So I went to the 13th Street entrance. You had to walk down this crazy hallway, and there was this incredible elevator that was, I say it was designed by guillotine. It had no, you stuck your head out, it had no doors, no nothing. And so I went all the way up to 6th floor, and the door opened up, and it was like a Fellini flick in there for me. I mean, I was very green. I didn't know what to expect, but it was really quite a scene. Larry had this living room with a full-blown stage, right? He had his stage there. And
he was rehearsing with the band there a lot. He had the East Street band, or the Climax band, he called it.
He had the Climax band. He had the East Street band, and he had the Climax band. Howard, I think, was in the East Street band, right?
Yeah, he also called it, they would play, and Howard would say, oh, now we have a minor climax, and maybe we'll have a major climax. So he was always funny, and at the end of every gig, he would sing a couple, My Yiddish Mama. That was his shtick.
It's true, yeah. So that was, it was very different from whatever I had seen before, and fantastic. Fantastic.
Yeah, I remember going to that when I came up there, and there was that big painting, The Journey, hanging on the back wall all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Same case when you started?
I'm sorry, say that?
The painting was there when you started as well?
I think The Journey was there, yes.
That kept hanging there for a long
time. Yeah, there would be different works that he'd, rotate from time to time, but I think The Journey was up there.
So it would have been about less than 10 years from when, Reiner, you worked with Larry and David when you started working. First, David, before we go into this next part, I do want to ask, do you recall your first interaction with Larry when you walked in there?
It was a little different. Larry, there were other assistants. There was another assistant. So there was a little bit of a buffer.
Okay.
And, but I was introduced to a few people right away, and Larry was lifting weights across the room. He was lifting his weights, and he was curious. It was like Reiner said, Larry was by far the most curious person. He was constantly asking questions, always interested, looking, very alert and very aware of everything. So, I saw him immediately, and he was looking, but I didn't speak to him right away. So I had a little bit of a different experience because there was a little bit of a buffer for a while. And Larry, I think, kind of picked up on the fact that I was very green and kind of, I'd like to say innocent. I really was. I was not accustomed to his bohemian lifestyle at all. Quite the opposite of what I grew up with. And I was exposed to a lot of art, but not like this. And so I think he liked to play with me a little bit and kind of have fun with my naivety. And so he, wouldn't call me by my name. He wouldn't address me for a long time. Then he started to call me another name. He liked to play with my head.
It sounds like the studio grew between each of your tenures there from when you finished, right?
No, it didn't grow. It was the same loft.
Was it,
his
in terms
staff.
of practice, the staff.
I don't know, you had more?
We you know what it was? It was really, I think when Reiner left, this other gentleman named John was working there, and he sort of moved into the studio.
When I quit, John was cleaning up the kitchen, getting lunches and doing all kinds of whatever was to do. And then after I quit, John sort of moved up into the studio and helped him with the work.
And they developed Larry was doing at that time, beginning to do these three-dimensional kind of relief paintings. And so it required probably, John, that's what they brought me in for initially, was to help do the relief sculptural aspects of the work. And so
like layering foam board.
And then cutting it and sculpting it and putting it all together. And that was my initial thing. Did that for many, many years, actually. So that production, those works actually became pretty popular. They were popular, commercially popular, not necessarily critically popular. but he was selling them, and I think we were going into production. You know, we were moving on it. So they brought me in. So you had John and you had myself, and then eventually we did bring in other people as well because we were making quite a few of those works. You know, for a while.
Yeah. That was different from what I.
That was different than from.
Yeah, I was just working with him by himself.
Ryan was really just with Larry, probably.
I was just with Larry. You know, it was just the two of us, and Larry would, at that time, you know, he had trouble with Marlboro and the gallery, and he had done these. We were doing these Japanese works.
Yeah.
And no one wanted those. I mean, it was like. And so he did a lot of portrait commissions in those days. So we worked on portrait commission and prints with Studio. And then he would go away for the summer. For the winter, he went to Zuvateneo.
Yeah.
And I said, Larry, I need some work while you're away. And he says, oh, let's make some prints. So he did a drawing, or we did some spray or something. I said, well, look, with the drawing, with this, with that, I can make you 100 while you're away, you know. So we would make these handmade editions. So I would do those while he was away, and that kept me sort of afloat while I was doing my own work, and you know, it was fine.
So whereas David, your experience was potentially initially more structured, brought in for a specific project.
Yeah, I was brought in for those projects. It changed over time because
Right.
I was with Larry for a while. I did eventually work more closely with Larry, but initially it was doing the sculptural work on these three-dimensional relief type paintings.
And you worked with Larry as his, closely with Larry until his death.
Yeah, I was with him when he took his last breath. Yeah.
And of course, continue to
Yeah.
work with him in the sense of the foundation.
Yes.
Now, this is a very broad question, but for both of you, what is it like to be Larry Rivers' studio assistant?
You had to be ready for a phone call at any time. I need you now. I have a problem here. Can you come over? And he knew I was 5 blocks away. And so I would just come over. I mean, I was this German kid who, you know, you know, what else am I going to do? I just go over there and work with him. And he would call me anytime. I mean, sometimes very early, sometimes late at night. Sometimes I wouldn't pick up the phone because it's just, you know, it's too much. But we had this relationship. Somehow I always got along with him. A lot of people he pissed off, you know. He was not very friendly to everybody. He could be very difficult. Yeah. And certain collectors would come in and wanted portrait commissions, and he said, and then they would say, oh, they would make demands, and they would say, oh, we like the way you do it with the one eye. I want the kind of portrait with the one eye missing. And Larry would say, that's extra. You know, so he was kind of he was a little bit of a showman. He was a performer too, you know. So Larry, so I enjoyed the whole drama as a voyeur.
Do you think there was something about who you were as a young man that allowed you two to get along well?
I was not confrontational. I wanted to learn. I liked I saw the way he had a talent for mixing paint and the way he was drawing. And I said, well, I'm going to absorb myself in this for a while because I can get something out of this. And I think I did. So for me, it was just an immersive learning experience of how also New York art fair worked, how New York functioned. I was this kid from Germany. And whoever came through the studio was very interesting people. You know? I mean, the first time I met him, I mean, I came to the 14th Street studio, and he was in the studio, and then Taylor Mead opened the door, you know, and he was a poet. I don't know if you. And then he went back into the bedroom, and then I went to Larry, and then Taylor's a funny guy. He comes out with a telephone receiver in his underpants, dragging the phone behind him, and says, Larry, there is a call for you. It was absolutely hilarious, you know. So stuff like that was happening around the studio.
This was an educational experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't think twice about it. I just thought, this is hilarious. I was not judgmental about it.
Do you feel that you became, in those 4 or 5 years that you were working closely with Larry, would you ever describe it as a friendship, or is it very much mentor, student?
It became a friendship over the years, because he also was then later saying that all of a sudden he got a lot of work to do, or things were happening, and then he was traveling, and he said, "Oh, we got to do this painting. Why don't you get it started?" So I would just start it. I said, "Well, I'll start in your style, and you come in and see what we can do," and then he would do that. Mm-hmm. And then there was one painting that David, you know, the Marlborough Gallery came in, and he says, "I want that painting for the gallery," you know. And then Larry said, "Oh, I just sold that painting to someone, you know, last week, and can't you make another one?" So I made another one. Mm-hmm. And then there were the two of them. And then he said, let's work on both of them now, so to get them even. So he started working on both paintings to get them to look sort of even. And I thought, wow, this is you know, he was always throwing things into the system to sabotage things and to be provocative. That was his style, you know. He didn't take things too seriously in that way. And then I remember Howard Kenowitz came he had a print he had made, a lithograph, and Howard, you know, had it in cellophane, and he took it out and he wanted to present it to Larry, and he said, "I just made this," and he unwrapped it very carefully. And Larry, you know, took the print, took a staple gun, stapled it on the wall. I said, "Yeah, I like it." You know, just to give him a little edge.
When Larry would say something to you like, "Get the painting started," did that feel like trust to you?
Yeah, it felt like trust to me, because I watched him paint, and I watched his palette, and at that time I was absorbing things pretty well. I was young and impressionable, and I also absorbed the drawing, rubbing it out, that kind of play of layers and different gradations in paint. And I was very early influenced by that. Mm-hmm. And at some point you have to just get over it.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel a similar level of trust from Larry, David?
Later on, yeah, it took time. I wasn't as savvy as this gentleman over here, because I didn't quite get a lot of things that he was trying to signal to me. But yes, this very similar thing happened. The thing about it, it's an interesting thing, is Larry had a reputation of being very difficult with a lot of people. I think with the studio assistants, we had maybe a different experience, because Larry was, for everything you may hear about him, that man was about the work. He was really about the art. And if you were working on that with him, you know, there was a certain respect and a certain regard for doing that. Yeah, he'd kid around, and you know, it could be funny and he could be difficult and all of that, but yeah, at a certain point in time, I had a similar thing, because one of the things Larry would do, Larry had to have a source. For whatever you see in his work, he had to have a source. And as abstract as something may look to you, I can assure you he had a source. He would, at a certain point, he would have his source, let's say here, the painting he's going to work on over here. He'd call me over, and we'd sit and analyze this photograph or this image, and he'd analyze, what do you think this is? Do you think that's a thumb? Is that a hat? What do you think that's his hat, isn't it? No, I think it's his thumb. You think it's his thumb? It's not his thumb. What are you, crazy? He'd do that, and he'd go, okay, maybe it's his hat. He goes, I don't know, I think it's his hat. A little while after, he'd go, oh, it's his thumb. You know, and you go, okay, I think it's a stump. Yeah, I mean, it's a stump. Okay, it's a stump. Great. And he'd do this for, you know, we'd spend 40, 45 minutes looking at this thing, and he'd pick up his paint. He was satisfied. And he'd go to this canvas, and it's like this. It's like, well, what was that about? You know, we were analyzing, but it almost kind of liberated him. And he really was a real master. I mean, to watch him do this and to watch him work and his draftsmanship, the way he could pull things in and get rid of them, bring them back, he was an absolute master. So you got to be around that, and you could absorb it, as Rainer was saying. And yeah, when he did do that with me as well and said, I want you to start this, yeah, it was a good feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was best when he was playful.
Yeah.
I mean, we all are best when we are playful, right?
Yeah.
But there are certain moments when he got tight too, and then he had to do something completely different,
yes.
Go away or play the saxophone, and he would come back, you know.
It's true. The interesting thing in the context of all of this is, you know, we have the Stones with us, and it's this famous collaboration. And this is the thing I find fascinating about Larry, is he's got this incredible reputation of being difficult and whatever, but he absolutely loved collaboration. I think he needed people around him quite a bit. And it wasn't an ego thing when you were working with him. I mean, he was open to a lot of things. It's fascinating. He needed it, and I think from my understanding of it, he started out as a musician, as a jazz musician. And if you think about creating art, and in particular at that time, in the 50s and still today, the idea of creating something new and unique that had never been seen before, something original, you know, how do you do that? And one of the ways that you can do that is in the improvisational aspect of jazz music. You cannot create this piece that a group ensemble gets together and improvises, and boom, they've got something new and unique, and it happens, and there it is, and it cannot happen any other way. And this was sort of something that I think translated into his art, in the sense of this collaboration. He could, you know, this Stones is not going to happen unless he's got someone with him. It's just not going to be what you see. Right. You know, so it's a fascinating thing. You know, people have always tried to say, well, how did his music career connect with his art? I think that's how. It's in that sense of drive to originate something. And you get that with jazz music, and you get that with collaboration.
Well, he also did a lot of book covers for poets.
He did. He collaborated with Kenneth Cope quite a bit, and did book covers. He did book covers for a lot of
and had aspirations of being a poet.
Yes.
At one point.
Yes, that's when he went to met Tatiana on the boat. Mm-hmm. He was, I think it was 1950, and he was on a boat to go to France, where he had actually had his exhibition in 1949, I believe, and Clem Greenberg had praised it and said he was a better painter than Bonnard or something along that line. And yeah, that was good for him. And so I think at a certain point Larry thought, well, okay, I'm going to go to France and I'm going to be a poet now. But I think he went with his saxophone, which he went everywhere with his saxophone. And I have a romanticized vision of him playing the sax on the boat, which I believe actually is a story that I heard somewhere, and that Tatiana heard him playing the sax. And that's how they initially met. And I think Tatiana Grossman and her husband, was it Maurice?
Maurice,
yes. It was Maurice, right? I think they were on the boat going back to France because I think that they had an apartment there that they had given up during the war, but they continued to pay for. And so they were going back to reclaim their apartment. Larry was going to France to write poetry and maybe play music. And he meets these people, and I think that's where he stayed with the Grossmans in their apartment. I think that's where he had a place to stay.
And towards that end, David, you know, you speak about how, on one hand, Larry has this reputation as difficult, and yet he is eminently collaborative and open. Case in point, Tatiana Grossman says that she's opening this new print studio, gives him the chance to have the inaugural project, and As we mentioned, he conceives of himself as a poet or potential poet at this point in time. However, when given the opportunity for this project, he says, I know somebody who will be great. And so he immediately brings in another artist into the fold.
Right.
Does not take the project for himself, but brings in other minds, more creativity. And then, of course, Tatiana is introduced to Frank O'Hara at Larry's Southampton home. Yeah. And when Frank comes down the stairs and he says, this is the man for the job. And this project is, on the surface, quite clearly collaborative. The parameters for the project, as you guys know, begun in 1957. Both men had to be in the room at the same time while working on the project. Neither could do any work on it if the other was not present. Larry did the visual artwork, and Frank did the writing, both coming up with the text, but also physically doing the writing. I wonder, by the time you both got to know Larry, did he ever speak of this project?
He did, because I was with him at Tanya's. We would go over there. He did some other prints while I first met him in the 70s. And he was always invited back to do other prints. And we would, at some points, he would talk about things he had done and the collaborations. And he was very, I mean, that's after Frank had died. And I think that caused him a lot of trouble and pain.
Yes, very much so.
I mean, he was a little bit lost at the time and got into all kinds of stuff that he shouldn't have gotten
absolutely.
into. And when I met him, he was basically coming out of that and wanted to re-engage.
Yeah.
And I just came along at that time. I don't know.
So Frank's death in the mid-60s affected Larry pretty deeply.
Tremendously.
His eulogy, I know, was very emotionally charged, painful.
Also, he was, at that time, being sidelined by the art world because his time had passed. Something else was coming. There was a lot of minimal art coming out and second generation abstract expressions people. And there was a concept art came in and the whole downtown scene changed, and he was a little bit out of that, you know. So he was marginalized at that point.
Did he ever speak of Frank?
Yeah, he did, with great affection always. And what a great friendship they had and how they worked together. And, you know, he just missed him a lot. I mean, it's hard to explain any further. So.
Yeah. You know, part of the beauty, but also the tragedy of the Stone series is, you know, the love and affection they had for one another, but also from Frank O'Hara's perspective, this inability to close the gap and be fully fledged romantic partners. Did Larry ever acknowledge that aspect of their relationship?
No, I think Larry was very open to a lot of different experiences. And he also had girlfriends, he had, you know, it was all very, very open, I think.
Could it have been less an issue of, as it's often framed, Frank wanting an open homosexual relationship and Larry not being ready for that, and maybe been more of Frank wanting this monogamous relationship and Larry maybe not matching that energy in the same way, and maybe just being open to unlimited experiences?
I don't have any knowledge of that. That those intricacies were not. But I know Larry always liked girls and he liked men. He was just.
It's neither one of us unfortunately were around for Frank. Would have been amazing to meet him. My take on it is exactly like Reiner said. Larry was, you know, I always say he was trisexual. You know, try anything. And that's really how he was. And he, by the time I knew him, I think he had issues with the concept of love. Or I mean, when I read the letters, because he and Frank wrote letters to each other for about 15 years of their friendship, and they're amazing. The letters between them, from the moment they met, these letters, they're incredible. And I always say they read like a Vasari Chronicles for the 50s and 60s. It's amazing. Lots of gossip, though. And I was reading them, and I got, I thought, wow, this is like the Vasari, these guys are chronicling everything. And then I got to a letter, unknowingly, I get to this letter that Frank wrote to Larry that says, "Dear Giorgio Vasari." I mean, so they knew what they were doing. They were doing this, they were deliberately doing this kind of thing. But my point is that I think that when I knew Larry, when you read some of those earlier stuff, there's some very romantic language in there, some very patriotic language in there. It's very interesting. And I think when I knew him, he was a little bit difficult about the concept of love. I think he had a hard time with it. I think he really loved Frank. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think there was a question. And it's beyond the sexuality of it. He just loved this man. Mm. And I think it might have been his greatest love that he ever had. That's my opinion. I could be wrong, but that's what I get from looking at everything, reading everything, and looking at the work in its entirety. Because if you look at Larry's entire body of work, there are some fascinating changes that go on in his work. And stones, I think, and if I'm going to talk, if I'm saying too much, just say, amen, that's enough. But to me, this is one of the things that fascinates me. By 1953, Larry made a change in his art. Prior to 53, he was influenced by Bonnard and maybe Soutine. You could see those influences in his work, right? Very derivative at that time. 53, he almost has an epiphany in terms of the way he worked. And he gets into rag wiping and charcoal drawing and all this kind of stuff. It changes dramatically. And he has a great run with this style. I mean, it's incredible. That's when he did Washington Crossing the Delaware, and he did all these amazing, gorgeous portraits of friends. I mean, double portrait of Bertie at the Whitney is an absolutely staggeringly beautiful one. So it's gorgeous. And you see these incredible works. Bertie his mother-in-law was a huge, huge figure in his life, very important person in his life. And she sort of managed his crazy life, that was going on at the time. I mean, all these people coming in and out of his house. And she was kind of like, she put up with everything and was somewhat been described as sort of angelic in the sense of how she was able to handle everything. Very important figure. She appears in a lot of his work. Of the people in his life, the two people that appear in his work the most really are Bertie and Frank. And when Bertie, this is an interesting thing. They did this project, they started this project in 57. In 1957, Bertie died unexpectedly. And this was a blow to Larry in many ways. One, he loved this woman and, he had children and she was in charge of everything, and what is he going to do? But it was a shock to him. It's a big shock. And this was one of his muse, she's gone. So when you look at this, if you look at his work up to 57, you see this incredible run of recognizable imagery, some abstraction, but the mix of the abex and the recognizable. And then 57, things start to somehow change. He gets as close to abstraction as he gets in around 58. And it's a mix. You'll see there's always going to be other works that are more recognizable, but you see him take this turn to where some of the works just are almost like Franz Klein. I mean, almost can't tell that there's something in there. And remember, he had to have something to look at. He had to. So even in those incredibly abstract works, he's still looking at something. That piece over there of Bertie that we see fascinates me because I know this Stones series. I've seen a lot of them. I've never seen one of them where he has Bertie drawn and collaged into the piece. Mm-hmm. That's the only one I've ever seen. There may be another one out there, but that's not how they look. They look like this. If they look more like this. There's no Bertie in that. Mm-mm. And that's how they were. And to me, when Bertie died, it messed him up. His source, his muse is gone. He doesn't have someone to look at. So Bertie comes out looking like that she's not there. Mm-hmm. But he couldn't have done this very personal project without a close person in his life who knew him intimately, holding his hand and doing it with him. And that's why we see these, I think we're able to see this personal project. It was personal for both of them. But it kind of walked Larry through it in a way that he was able to maintain some of that connection to the personal. What I saw with Larry was you had to get through a certain kind of block of years of being hurt by life. And people don't see that because he was a toughie, he was a tough guy. But you can see it in the art. And so by 58, at the end of 58, 59, Larry begins to bring the figure, the recognizable, back in. But dig this, he doesn't bring it in the way he brought in my friends and family. He starts to paint images of the recognizable stuff that isn't going to die. So stuff like Last Civil War Veteran, which is a death scene, to cigarette labels, cars, automobiles. He's doing pop art iconography, recognizable imagery, and he wasn't doing that before. You'd see some of those things come into some of the works, but not being spotlighted, right? So now he's back to being recognizable imagery, 59, 60. He's doing pop, he's doing pre-pop work, really. And he has a great run with this. And Frank dies in 66, and the work takes a big change again. And so much so that, and it's interesting that Reiner worked on, and I think probably helped Larry through a lot of this. Because I observed that Larry removed his very famous hand from the works. After Frank dies, that hand is gone. And that was his signature. I mean, you could see Larry's handling was his draftsmanship. It was so important. Now he's gone. Now he takes it out of the work, and he's doing plastic constructions and all of these things where you don't see the hand anymore. And even that airbrush stuff was a way for him to not, it's a different hand. It's removed, once removed. And he had to get, like, Reiner was saying, he had to come back into it. He had to get back into it, and he did eventually.
Yeah, eventually, after the Japanese things, because there was basically just stencils and spraying, and we transferred these Japanese prints into big paintings. I didn't quite understand what it was about, but I worked on them.
How did he put himself back into the work? Was there a moment that you remember, Reiner? Were there conversations happening? A turning point?
Well, after he had this show with Marlboro with the big Japanese works, and then that didn't do well at all. And then he had to survive doing. I mean, he needed money. He had a family to support. He had an ex-wife who lived uptown, and he took a lot of portrait commissions. So he got back into it through these commissions, and then he did these things about his family.
Yeah.
And then he really ran out of ideas again, and he says, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to do the greatest hits of Larry.
Yeah, that was
okay,
maybe
Larry, that's a little corny, but I said,
what he did.
if you want to do that, I want to do that. I want to do the greatest hits. So he went back to his old paintings and started redoing his old paintings.
And that may be what really got his hand back into it.
Yeah.
Around about 78, I think.
Yeah, and then he found another collector who supported him very much, Jeffrey Luria, who commissioned a lot of works. The whole Matzah paintings. The history of the Jews and all that kind of stuff. So he did a lot of work that was commissioned because he needed the money.
And David, you mentioned that this is a very unique print of Birdie over here.
So far.
I wonder if it was around that time. This whole set, I should mention, has later interventions by Larry in several editions. ULAE, great Universal limited art editions, which this was their first project in '57. They're still in business out of Bayshore, New York. Great print studio. They're not sure when Larry went back in to make these additions. Yeah. Would either of you have a guess based on your interpretation?
My guess is Frank died. My guess is Frank died in '66, and it sparked something, and he went back. Now, it's possible. It's possible that when Frank died, there were memorials. In '67, I think there was a memorial, maybe it was at the MoMA or something. There was a few different things, different events. And Larry was doing work for some of those. In Memory of My Feelings, I think, was one of the things. And Larry was doing work for that. And I'm guessing, if I had to put money on it, Frank died and he started to revisit these possible things. And that's how that got in there.
And then another part of it too is this is a set that, it's a set that he gave to Tanya.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if, what other information does that give us, but it is a very unusual set.
It is.
Because he went back in and experimented, and if you think about the fact that this series originated as a project between him and Frank, and now Frank is gone, and what does it mean to go back into the series by himself? It feels like it must have been a very emotional
I think you're absolutely right.
act.
I think you're absolutely right.
Would either of you describe Larry as a teacher?
I don't think he would do stuff and one would watch. I mean, it's like he wasn't really a lecturer or anything. He was not like on a high horse trying to tell.
I mean, he did teach and he did lecture, but
he took a teaching job at Parsons, and he hated to go in there. So he would send me in there because he only took the job because of health insurance.
This is great.
And he said, Reiner, get the class started.
And then he would try to date the students. And Daria, I think,
that's how we met.
Daria was one of the young artists, and
At Parsons, yeah.
and then she was living on 9th Street, and Larry got a color TV and walked the color TV over to her. I remember that. And
Did he ever ask you to date the students?
Huh?
Did he ever ask you to date the students for him? Or
No. He was always he wanted. I had
in-
just gotten married. I met a girl at Spring Street Bar, and I got married 10 weeks. I mean, I was also all of a sudden. This crazy lifestyle of Larry sort of inspired me to be a little more open. And so I got married very quickly. Actually, also, I wanted to stay in New York. I didn't want to go back to Germany. I met this girl, we got married, so I got a green card and all that stuff. So it was all that.
Now, David, you mentioned that when you started working for Larry, you were in some ways an innocent. It sounds like Larry opened up Reiner to some extent. Did the same process happen with you?
Yeah, to a certain extent, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you see him as I'm guessing a lot of things, but was he a mentor to you, a teacher to you, a friend to you, employer?
All of those things. Yeah, at different times. It evolved. But yeah, in terms of teaching, I think Reiner is spot on when he says it's really about watching him work. If you had the I think, great fortune to be able to be next to him when he was working, because this is a master. I've watched other people work. This was a master. And he really was amazing. Reiner kind of casually mentioned the way he mixed colors. I mean, oh my God, this guy's palette. It's crazy.
Yeah, he also a certain palette, and I know how he would do it, and I watched it and I said, okay, I can learn from that.
And I think that's how the best way to learn really is to be lucky enough to be next to him.
He was always doing the raw umber. He would always put a tint of phthalo green in it to just make it give it a little extra. Or with the reds, he would take another red into the burned umbers, and then the whites.
You really learned color. I mean, you really learned color. I mean, right?
Well, he watched a lot of Bonnard. And,
yes.
There was this Bonnard show, 49, was at the MoMA or something.
Right. That's exactly right. It influenced a lot of the artists at that time, the Bonnard show.
How did Larry move within his studio and work within his studio differently to other artists?
Okay, let's see. I have to say, I have watched other artists work. I haven't necessarily been in their studios, so I can't say. I've watched footage of other artists working, so I don't think I can give you a fair answer on that.
What about?
I will say that he worked, you know, like Reiner said before, you had to be open to that phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't think the man slept. I mean, he worked.
Well, he couldn't sleep sometimes.
Yeah.
He didn't sleep well,
Yeah.
you know, and he would wake up and then he would, and sometimes he would paint like crazy and he would run to the kitchen and I was standing there waiting, what do we do next? And then he was on the phone for 10 minutes and then
Yeah.
he would come back and he would, you know, it was always jarring, back and forth.
But you would know different than, he was probably very different than Howard.
Oh, Howard was like more like a technician. Even though Howard started as an abstract painter, but then he got very precise with his photorealist style. Yeah. And then that doesn't allow that kind of personality. So you have to be, we did a lot of stencils and cutting and you know, the painting, the Hampton's Drive-In we made when I was working with Howard, which is at the parish. Mm-hmm. And then I made an edition of 30 small ones for him with the same stencils by hand. Mm-hmm. In those days.
Two artists that I would like you to compare to Larry, if you can, would be yourselves. Is there any of Larry in your individual practices today?
For me, it's the impromptu, the layering of different items, or the layering of different ways of approaching the work, and the time element. I mean, I'm a little different than Larry, that I do things, I put them away, and I don't know what to do there, so I go to something else, and I come back when I see something that goes somewhere. And I learned from Larry to just step away and do something else and come back. And that's the way Larry went, and he goes to the kitchen, does something, and comes back with a fresh eye, and sometimes that's what I learned, that the interaction with time and patience and color. We both love color, you know, and drawing. I mean, I did a lot of drawing. I don't do it as much anymore, but it's something I really got from him, that immediacy of interaction with the work in a direct way, with the hand movement.
David?
Larry had a funny comment with me. My work was not like his at all. Mm-hmm. My work was probably influenced by Mexican muralists more than anything for a long time. And so at the time I was working with him, he'd be frustrated by that. It was funny. And he said to me one time, he said, "I understood it. You work for me. Your work doesn't look like mine. Why The ego was wonderful, you know. And I said, well, you know, I can do this work because of what you did. How's that? You know? But so I wasn't. I was very resistant to being influenced by things. But yeah, you couldn't avoid it. I think color. My understanding of color changed dramatically working with him. It was unavoidable. The understanding of what can go into a color and what a color can do, and that changed. That grew quite a bit. I'm not as prolific. I'm not a very prolific artist. It takes me a long time to do things. It's funny, when I worked for him, you know, you needed to do things quickly, and it could. But on my own stuff, I'm not that way. But what Rainer mentioned is important, is that distance. Take a step away, do something else, because your eye, you know, your eye and your ego will fool you into thinking you're doing a wonderful job. You need to step back and come at it fresh, and you need to find tricks and ways to do that.
Well, also sometimes there's a lot of humor in Larry's work. I mean, the idea of having humor in the work, which is unusual for most artists who are very serious, and we always make fun of guys who are overly serious. Like we did this Barney Newman painting, you know, and then Larry called up the widow, and the widow came over and wanted to show him that painting, and Larry called it "The stripe is in the eye of the beholder," you know, because he had this stripe and then Barney Newman. It was. You know, a bit cornball, but that was Larry's way of dealing with this kind of overly serious approach with these academics with the tie from Harvard and that kind of thing.
He had a
didn't
great
like
sense
that.
of humor. He was very, very funny.
He was always undermining that,
Yeah.
and then he would say to people, "Oh, some people's plumbing looks better than any sculpture I've seen lately." You know.
It's true.
Reiner, do you have a favorite Larry Rivers story?
I don't know. I told you a bunch already. So
You did. We did get a lot of good ones.
Yeah. So let's leave it at that for the moment.
A question for both of you. We've talked a lot about Larry's studio. I'll start with you, David. Could you describe your studio for me?
In transition all the time. It's never the way I want it to be. How's that? It's I'm easily distracted, so I'm in an ideal world. I'd like a very clean, pristine studio.
Yeah.
Where there isn't a lot of things that distract me, but it never works out that way. So it's never quite one particular way. I do certain things, very specific things, that I have to do that I did get from Larry. So, for example, lighting is a very, very important thing for me. I have to have all light put on the work, none in my eyes. Sounds simple, but it's really important. And I think as a younger artist, in school, you don't realize how much that light will change things. And so, for example, if I'm painting and there's light that is getting this way, it's shutting my pupil down. I'm not perceiving color the same. It doesn't look right. So what I do is I have baffles up on the light and put everything on the painting. And it's a very, that's a very important thing. I picked that up from Larry. It's those kind of things. How the paints are laid out. We have, the way I countersink the turpentine containers so that when I sweep my arm across them, I don't knock the brushes over. It's stupid little things like that.
Yeah.
Because any little thing can get in the way and affect where you're going, and your mind is so open to thinking that, oh, maybe that was meant to happen, it's taken away. I want to focus on the work. I don't want to be, creating other fantasies here over mistakes.
Yeah.
So.
What's your studio like?
I have a nice studio in Katsok, a barn, like 2,500 square feet where I work in. And I have, over the years, worked in different forms. So I worked a lot with pure pigments. So I have one table that's on wheels that's just pure pigments. Then I have another rolling table that's just oil paint. And then I have a third rolling table that's just acrylics. And so I work all of them, and then I have spray paints, and I have paintings all over the place, and I just keep. And I also maintain a studio in Cologne, Germany, where I show a lot in Europe, so I have a similar setup over there. And I basically work alone. I don't have
You don't have assistants.
I don't have assistants. Sometimes I have people help me pack stuff, but I just don't like anybody around. I just like to be by myself, and I get into this world and I stay in my world, and the older I get, the more it comes from within my own history and my own, the outward influences are fading. I mean, I used to do a lot of high-low kind of cultural imagery that I would mix, and at some point I just said, I gotta get rid of the images, I want the levels. What it became something else.
The figure has really faded out of your work over time. So has your move towards abstraction?
I don't see this abstraction.
Oh, okay.
Because I know I'm not abstracting from anything.
Uh-huh.
So the narrative is in the different things I layer. I mean, those ideas of making twin paintings that I've been doing, that I discovered by making monoprints. I always thought that, oh, the plate looks great, I got this. They belong together because... So I started layering pigments and then using another canvas with oil paint and making sandwiches working them with my hands and peeling them apart, so the layers would break up in different forms, and then I would invert one when I show them. And the funny thing happened, there was no up, there was no down. The layers were in reverse. Whatever was on the bottom there was on top there. So it became like a little of a game, and I worked that for quite a long time, and now I'm breaking out of that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's evolving.
What you just described, not abstract, actually quite specific. The vocabulary is very personal to you.
Yeah, it's very personal. To me, they create their own narrative.
Mm-hmm.
In the format, in the conceptual approach. It's a conceptual approach, but with a very tactile result that looks like a painting.
Mm-hmm.
more in sort of an abstract way, but it's to me they're not abstract. And I used to give them titles randomly from the phone book, twins. They get a name. I said, well, you get born with a name. That painting got born with a name. I didn't want to give a descriptive title,
right?
Because that just sounds corny.
Sort of reminds me of what you were saying before, David, about no matter how abstract Larry's work looked at different points, there was always a source.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there is always a source.
There is.
To everything.
Yep, there is. I feel the same way as Reiner in that sense that I'd never look at work and think, oh, that's an abstraction. I mean, I don't think you can get that abstract. I don't know. I haven't seen anything that abstract, but.